go ahead and start, and we'll start with introductions. I'm Lori Carnahan. I'm with the Human Resources Office.
Jill Jalbert, Douglas County Administrator's Office.
Toni, City Attorney.
Doug Green, Division Chief, Fire Medical.
Shaun, Coffey, Division Chief, Interim Fire Chief for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical.
Jason Williams, Local 1596.
Dean Garrison, Local 1596.
Aaron Payne, Local 1596.
And I'm Casey Toomey from the City Manager's Office.
I'm Michelle Valverde, with Jill.
Thank you. We usually do the opening statement. We have one guest that hasn't been here for a while. Do you have the opening statement, or would you like us to read it? I'll have you go ahead and read it.
Read it? Okay.
Just a minute.
Yes, ma'am. Opening statement. The purpose of these meetings is to discuss issues concerning wages and/or fringe benefits and/or working conditions between the City of Lawrence and the elected representatives of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 1596. Pursuant to Resolution 6817, these discussions are to be open to the public unless it is mutually agreed to have them closed to the public. However, there will be no public comment during these discussions. Observers are expected to remain silent and are asked to silence their cell phones. Proper decorum for a business meeting shall be observed at all times. Anyone who disrupts the meeting will be asked to leave. Ground rules have been previously agreed to by both parties. The city manager and the president of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 1596, will co-chair the meetings. The city and the IAFF shall designate a backup co-chair for the meetings. These meetings will be recorded and posted to the city's website.
Hey, Lori, before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that we had sort of a storm event earlier this week, and wanted to go on the record as thanking you all, members of the IAFF and our leadership that are here today from Fire Medical, for the work that you all did responding to that storm event and continue to do responding to that storm event. So we're grateful that we have all of you to help folks in our community, and just wanted to take a minute to thank you and show our appreciation.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you. Dean, if you don't mind, I think the city would like to caucus for about 15 minutes and reconvene at 10 till.
Great. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
See you then.
because I thought about that. Number one, there's only certain things I can do. Yeah, you're right. You think you're a larger town, but you're not. Okay, I think, Kurt, I think we're ready. Are we ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, on the agenda, exchange of materials. Did you have anything?
No, ma'am.
We don't have anything either. We have some materials that we'll pass out to discuss when we get to the agenda items, but we don't have anything that was homework, if you will, to pass out today. And we don't have any old business. Do you agree with that? That we kind of wrapped up those other two items last time?
Yes, ma'am.
And the new business was to start in on the economic items. And we listed last time, Article 8, Section 8.1 and 8.2 as items of interest. I don't know if you want to discuss them separately. I'm kind of set up to talk about them both at one time.
Okay.
And would be interested in hearing, I know you guys had an interest in 8.2.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be very interested in hearing a little bit about that.
Okay.
I need to pull out my document too. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared. Would, you had made a note that you were interested in establishing a general wage adjustment and had specifically talked about a CPI. And I'm somewhat familiar with the CPI and all the variations to it, and I was interested in hearing a little bit about what your thoughts were on that and how you might want to consider using it.
Well, we think the CPI is very straightforward and really expected it as a proposal from the city. You know, the Consumer Price Index sets that market value, so to speak, and we would adjust the pay plan accordingly. So you describe it.
think there are several different indexes.
That's correct. Yes, there are.
Did you have some discussion or some thoughts about how we might use that,
Yeah, I mean,
how we might select it? I'm very
it's,
interested in hearing
yeah,
your thoughts.
and it's, like you say, it's kind of, it may have to be a group discussion, because I think part of the plan and what you're interested in changing the plan. I personally view the CPI as more of a tying into a cost of living increase. The city doesn't really acknowledge cost of living increases right now. We've used the term wage adjustments over the past 10 years or so, which I believe is not really the correct term. A wage adjustment is to move entire blocks of pay plan to meet the market where we need to be. And so that is addressed sometimes through our contract as a wage adjustment, but truly it's like a cost of living increase. And the cost of living increase is used to, like a maintenance program, to maintain and to keep the pay plan where it should be. Using the cost of living, or using the CPI, and there are different indexes within the CPI, but using that calculation would help maintain the pay plan, and so we're not further behind. So now we're not having to do big adjustments, and hopefully we stay on the market value where we need to be. One of our thoughts, if you wanted how to actually administrate that, would be you would just take a 12-month period each year. You could use a June to June and calculate the percent change in the CPI to give you some sort of increase, a percent increase, and then that would be applied as a cost of living increase across the whole pay plan.
So your thought for the MOU is that we would indicate what the formula would be?
Yes.
For instance, your
Mhm.
example of June to June.
June to June, percent
And
change increase.
That whatever it said June to June for, in this case, 2018 to 2019
Yeah,
would
on
be
an
the
annual.
increase
Mhm.
for January of 2020?
Correct.
Okay.
And I use June and June, I don't know, I think with budgeting purposes and getting that out, I think we're open to whatever the city would need to do to get the processes in the right place, but June to June would be good.
Some sort of forecasting
Mhm.
with that.
And then the importance of sticking to that same plan. We can't be changing it or using different indexes or, something that's consistent, moving forward, I think is.
So what would your proposal be? I know we all like that proposal as an adjustment going forward to move wages up. What would your proposal be if for some reason that would be a negative?
Mhm.
Would we move wages and salaries down?
Well, that is one aspect of utilizing CPI, but it's a most accurate reflection of the economy. If you look at the trends in the last 40 years, maybe longer, it has been negative twice. The city could have a variety of ways to handle that. We could just not receive an increase, or we could agree to meet and discuss how to handle it. We believe if something had to be reduced, then the city itself is most likely in an economic crisis, and really bad things are happening, far worse than our pay being reduced by, whatever it is, 2%. We might be looking at other big cuts throughout the city. So it's probably going to merit something bad has happened economically, and so more than just a CPI said it went down. So we're anticipating a thorough discussion about how to handle that as well as many other things in that event. So,
Okay.
but we understand that the CPI is sometimes negative.
Okay, and willing to bear that
Yes, ma'am.
impact, or even make arrangements for that in whatever language we would land on.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you, historically, you said it's a couple of times in the last 40 years that it had gone down?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what we did with wages then?
I don't know what the
I've heard
city
rumors,
did.
because I wasn't around, I
Mhm.
don't think.
I don't know what the city did
Mhm.
during those times. I think the most recent was probably 2008. Do you remember
I
correctly?
don't remember.
We can reference the Bureau of Labor Statistics and tell you. And so I don't know what the city did.
I know what we did in '08, I'm pretty sure that's the year we went to the merit pool for the primary pay plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and I do remember that and Casey, you can probably speak to this more than I, that from a city, you know, when you talk about
Mhm.
economic impact to the city and our
Mhm.
revenues moving in, there's a little bit of lag time from the time that the economic event happens, both good and bad,
Mhm.
to when we see it in our revenues. And do you monitor that lag time?
I think what you said is accurate. I don't necessarily know that it's always the same. You know, it's not like a year later we feel it. It just kind of depends on, you know, I mean, there's lots of factors. So what industries are impacted, what the makeup of our tax base is at that given point, all of those things factor into how
Yeah.
that impact.
Well, you know, we view the CPI as an economic indicator that helps prevent those huge gaps, right? What the city's experiencing right now with other employees is nearly a $500,000 deficit just to get everyone caught up. Now we still have to maintain, if not get ahead. You know, so in the event that there were something impacting the economy in a negative way, this still helps to prevent making a decision like moving to a merit pool that would then, you know, 10 years later result in that huge deficit that creates now another financial problem, which is having to catch everybody up.
Hey, can I ask a
So-
question?
Sure.
So how would that, how would it work? I mean, I get how it would work in a vacuum if there weren't any other wage provisions in the agreement, just a CPI. But talk to me or explain your rationale of kind of how that works in conjunction with other incentives or ad pays. If folks are already getting additional pay
Mhm.
for those items,
Mhm.
are those taken into account? It seems like your
So-
wages are growing, so thoughts about that? Or
Yes, ma'am.
responses?
So that incentive is very separate. You know, CPI, you have a base pay, and then that base pay is simply adjusted by, just like it is now when we negotiate a specific amount. In this case, we're just negotiating that amount to be based on CPI. An incentive is something a person is paid extra to do extra. So that wouldn't be an issue.
And then how about the steps?
So all the steps all adjust accordingly.
So you'd be eligible for, I think it's 5% now
Mhm.
through the steps, 2 steps, if you're at the lower end of the pay plan. So that 5% would be in addition to whatever this general wage adjustment would be based on the CPI.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we're going back to talking about the market, I guess I'm struggling to understand how you don't count those towards, if the CPI is to recognize that the cost of the basket of goods goes up, your wages are growing because you're moving up in the pay plan, so you have additional wages to cover the additional cost of those goods. I guess that's where I'm not tracking.
Well, I think in the pay plan, we have a market indicator where we want to be, where we want our employees to be at for the purpose of recruitment and retention. And there's a set guidelines for us on how fast we need to get to that point. And that's how fast we move through the steps. That's just part of that entry level pay versus the longevity of pay of those employees being here and the education and experience that they're gained by employment. So that all happens and should be happening as we progress. The CPI is just to address the cost of goods and to maintain the current living conditions for those employees as the cost of things increase.
So is there, and maybe Casey, this is another way of asking what you're asking, is there a point in time with the city revenues that might be reacting a little different to even a regional CPI? Is there a point when, if for all employees who are at that market rate that you were talking about, where we feel like people should be at least at a market rate, that we would freeze the merit program, if you will, based on economic conditions that are more specific to Lawrence and the Lawrence revenues.
So they talked about that on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics,
Mhm.
that there is the general CPI, and there are regions within the CPI, and there's the CPI-U and W. And they talk about even more specifically within communities and towns. Their opinion of it is that things, as you get more smaller, or get more volatile, and can fluctuate and change more drastically within a time period. And so having an overall bigger picture is a better balance and more stable type of conditions to work within.
But the revenue end of the city coffers is more volatile and fluctuates more because our revenues don't come regionally, they only come locally. Would that be a fair statement?
It would be a fair statement, but we don't adjust pay accordingly. I mean, we wouldn't be changing payroll each month. We wouldn't be changing, because as the income changes, the revenue changes for the city, it also changes that way for the individual.
Mhm.
Gas prices may be up real high this week and real low next week.
But even if that were like averaged out over a year,
And that's what that does. The CPI does that averaging out, and it takes account for those
but
volatility. of
would
that.
it be a fair statement to say that even if we took an average for a year
Mhm.
and not looked at it month to month or week to week or anything like that? Because I know the city gets reports month to
Sure.
month on sales tax revenue and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. But even if we looked at that on an annual basis and projected where our annual revenues would be as a city, through, the fire department's all funded through the general fund, so that's all, Casey, this is more your bailiwick than mine, but it's sales tax and property tax.
Mhm.
So as the city projects what those will be in the upcoming year, those for the city, for our community and where we pull our revenues from, is a more, I think your statement was, and maybe I'm wrong, might be more volatile than even if we looked at a Plains region
Mhm.
or a Central region
Midwest
and a
region.
Midwest region. That it might be more volatile to the positive, it might be more volatile to the negative, but our revenues are gonna be only based on our community. If we look at a CPI that's more stable from a salary standpoint, that's regional, versus local, what might be something that we would look at to monitor the more volatile, if you will,
Mhm.
spike valley of our revenue stream?
Yeah, I guess I feel that the CPI is used and is approved by the President, Congress, Federal Reserve Board, and there are, I think I'm reading here through, over 50 million Social Security beneficiaries that use the CPI to finish it. The military and the federal services, retirees, all have cost of living adjusted to the CPI, and living wages adjusted by millions of Americans and communities just like Lawrence, and they're using it, and they're just as volatile, and the income and revenues change, just like Lawrence and no different. And they all use the CPI to adjust that cost of living increase for their,
So we have some of our market cities that are using it?
okay, we do. or is that
No,
a
that's a
statement?
question to you.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
on market.
Okay.
You said social security, like,
Social Security beneficiaries, military, federal civil services, retirees, all have cost of living adjustments tied to the CPI.
so, like military wages, they go up every year based on the CPI? Is that what that means?
I don't know if their wages, I mean, could go up or down. It's just a cost of living increase. As it costs more to live.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay.
So it costs more, in my understanding of the CPI is it's based on a basket of goods.
Correct.
Right, so I guess, one question I have about it is the basket of goods that the city purchases is different than the basket of goods that I as a person purchase. City doesn't buy a lot of milk, for example, or bread. We buy asphalt and steel and those
Mhm.
kinds of materials. I guess I question it a little bit that as we're looking at city expenses overall, that those indexes are different,
Okay.
for those kinds of costs. Thoughts about that?
So are you indicating that a different index would be better? I mean, there are several different types of indexes.
Well, I
To
don't-
include the CPIU, which was recommended by the third-party consultant on how to adjust wages.
I don't
That
know.
the city has hired to,
I guess I don't know what I'm recommending. I'm just asking if other people have similar thoughts that I do, that,
well, I believe that the third-party consultant the city hired recommends using the CPIU.
Pages 16 and 17 in the compensation studies gives a rundown year by year of how you would apply CPIU.
okay, do you wanna read that for us?
Multiple pages.
Oh, okay, I didn't know if there was like a specific sentence where, I thought it said a set of economic
Well, one sentence in
indicators.
particular says, "It is prudent to increase the schedule by the CPIU or some predetermined economic indicator."
So we utilize
Okay.
that as well as just fairness in the workplace, and like I said, we thought the city might have this same proposal. And the CPI, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is the most widely used measure of inflation, as an economic indicator, and it is viewed as an indicator of effectiveness of government economic policy. And like Aaron gave several examples of people that use this, but it's the most widely used. So this is essentially an industry standard for making cost of living adjustments.
Well, I do know that when our consultant was on site, that our office and the consultant had a conversation about CPIU, other market indicators that the city might use for adjusting its pay plan, because we recognize that annual adjustment keeps us on track, and everything moves a little bit every year. Some years it's barely at all, other years it's a bigger amount. So we recognize that with our pay plan, and I think at least the Human Resources Office is committed to keeping information in front of the city manager's office at budget time on that movement. I will tell you that she put this in her report. She also had a conversation, just like the second part of that sentence, that we have some sort of formula that makes sense for the city of Lawrence, or some sort of statement that makes sense to the city of Lawrence. And that's something that our office has been working on, being able to propose something to the city manager's office that looks at that group of indicators. For us, part of, and I guess that's where some of my questions went to, part of it is we have a market group that we hire from and that we want to be market competitive with. And so that's an economic indicator to us, or market indicator. An economic indicator to us might be what's happening regionally with the CPIU, but it also might be what's happening locally with us, because when we submit those proposals, because salaries and benefits are what, 50% of most of our fund budgets. I think there's only one fund where it's not at least 50%. So it's big when it comes to how the city budgets, and understanding that volatility that the revenue end has might be greater than the volatility in the CPIU, or if we take a single indicator, that is of concern to the people that have to run the balance sheet, that have to all make it come out to balanced at the end of the year. So I think that's the big conversation. Is I think the city is supportive of competitive salaries. We want competitive salaries. That's how we're all employed here. We want to be paid a fair and equitable wage. But balancing that against the volatility that sometimes the city has to endure from a revenue standpoint, well, that's a reality. And so I'm interested in a conversation, because that's the conversation that I have with the HR staff and subsequently with the city manager's office every year, is how do we balance a number that maybe a number that other places are using, or that we would like to use, or that we feel is important for hiring and retaining staff, against all of the competing factors with the city, and the revenue stream coming in. So I'd like to have some conversation that kind of broadens it a little bit, because that's the reality. The reality is, at the end of the day, that budget has to come in balanced, and I think that's the same way for the county, for the portion that the county contributes to the fire medical department.
So do you have a proposal for this issue?
I don't have factors that are bulleted out in the same manner that yours is. I do have something that we're willing to propose that kind of takes all of those things into account, if we would like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, I would like to say something about the
Please,
reality. The
please.
reality, as spelled out in the compensation study, says that 40 to 50% of City of Lawrence employees are not getting paid market value. And it uses the word, the City of Lawrence has been prospering, I think is the word they use, for 3 to 4 years. The economy is on an upward trend. So that's the reality of the situation currently. It also mentions that if you were to give less than a CPI or some other economic indicator, the city would continue to be falling behind the market value. And that the schedule, any type of pay schedule that didn't meet that CPI would become obsolete and would require more financial resources in the future.
And you're quoting from the main report of the fire?
The compensation study,
Mhm.
page 6, well, throughout the study.
Throughout the study. Yeah, the primary pay plan, which is, houses most of the city employees, under that pay plan, is in need of movement, and that is something that there is a proposal into the city manager's office for the 2020 budget that, well, you saw some of it happen in 2019, and you see some of it, you'll see some of it with the 2020 budget. I think the conversation that I just mentioned is what's happening right now, is balancing that against all of the other competing needs for the city budget.
So Lori, what you're saying is that 40 to 50% is across the entire organization,
Absolutely.
and
Mm-hmm.
and it's not necessarily individual jobs. We do have a separate report that talks about the market in terms of the positions that are covered by this MOU.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a different conclusion if you just isolated it and looked at those 3 positions and the market rates for those 3
True.
positions.
And there
I would
is,
agree, and I think over
Yeah.
the five or so negotiations that we've had together, it has always been an issue
Mhm.
for us. And I think you'll see that this group is better aligned with the market because of those discussions and because of this negotiation process. And we do not want to become falling behind like the rest of the city is.
I understand.
And we've had that discussion with you before, and
Mhm.
how we were concerned with that. And this is why we have this process. This is why we have an MOU for this group, is to maintain that. And we don't want to become further back. We want to keep moving in the right direction.
I understand that's a significant issue for you,
This,
and I
for
understand
the
it.
all city employees, I
Yeah.
believe.
I agree. And, I agree. And I agree that keeping the IAFF pay plan competitive is, a very important value for the city. I think keeping all 3 pay plans that we run competitive is an important value for the city. And I have heard that from the city manager. He has indicated, and I think I don't want to quote him because he's not here, but I think he has indicated to his management staff that the compensation program for all city employees is of extreme importance to him. So I agree with that statement, that it is important to keep a competitive pay plan for this group, since this is who we're talking about right here. But I do think a lot of the statements in there, the primary pay plan, when we look at all 3 of our pay plans, the primary pay plan is the one that is in need of attention for some of the reasons that we've talked about today.
Mhm.
The pay The study also mentions that these lean years where you might not have an increase, that those are the exception based off the history of the CPI, and it's not the norm. So these would be, according to the study, rare instances when you would have to discuss different situations when the economy just cannot support these increases.
What does the CPI, I mean, what has it been? I know the number in my head was, when the property tax lid was implemented, it uses a rolling 3-year average, I think, of the CPI. What's it look like in the past decade?
So, well, I can tell you the last 2 years, Casey, 2016 to 2017, it was 1.6%.
And
That's June to June.
June to June numbers.
2017 to 2018 is 2.9%. And like I said, we picked just June to June as
1.6, I'm sorry, Dean, would you repeat?
yes, ma'am.
that for me?
2016 to 2017, it was 1.6%. That's June to June. And then 2017 to 2018, it was 2.9%. Again, June to June.
So then we don't know what the 18 to 19 will be until after June?
For our purposes of, providing an example, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, they're sent out each month,
Yeah,
so we can look for this year. We could look back 100 years and see what the CPI has been historically, but
All I'm cautioning in this discussion is if we lock ourselves into a single number and don't have a group of considerations that we want to look at, is that this single number looks good for the last 2 years, but we all know it hasn't always looked that good.
Okay.
And when it doesn't look good, and the two, you said twice it's actually gone negative, I have yet in my career seen people, well, I won't say people never take pay cuts in the employers I've had, but in this employer, people have not taken pay cuts when the economic indicators and the financial situation is such that the money is limited. I've not seen a backward step in pay. That's not to say that other companies don't use that strategy.
We understand
but-
that.
And I
but
don't think we want to use
we
that
have
strategy.
we have seen layoffs, and so there's
Yeah,
for for the majority to maintain 1.6% versus someone for one person to actually lose their job is a huge. I mean, that's a huge impact. Even though my pay didn't go down, someone lost their job, and that's very important.
that
So,
is very important.
to maintain that 1.6% or whatever that the CPI dipped.
So that, that's part of what I would like to discuss instead of locking into one factor, because conversations during serious economic downturns are, do we hold wages steady? Do we suspend a merit pool? Do we go on a hiring freeze, or do we lay off positions and then continue to use our market indicators to move the salaries up for the people who don't lose their positions? And, probably to a person through this organization, if you ask, would you rather freeze salaries and keep everybody employed, or would you rather keep salaries moving at a market rate and sacrifice positions? You'd be all over the ballpark on which people think is more important. I know as a value, this organization has worked to keep people employed and really held back increases in salaries, although even during the most dire economic situations of the last decade, I heard the previous city manager say that he valued keeping people employed. He felt that was an important value, and he tried very hard to move salaries even a teeny tiny bit when other organizations were freezing them entirely. So when we talk about using the CPIU, I know our market cities during that economic downturn froze salaries for a number of years, even merit pools. General wage adjustments, merit pools didn't happen for 2 or 3 years, and this city has worked very hard to keep at least a little bit of that going. So I think looking at a hard factor like that is easy when you have a good example for the last couple of years. I think it's harder when we're starting to balance, when we're starting to actually balance the checkbook, if you will.
Casey mentioned the tax lit, and we are artificially hamstrung, city and county, on how, while the economy could be booming, like you referenced in the report, cities and counties aren't able to capture that growth in what we're able to. So if, looking at our assessed valuation numbers, our early assessed valuation numbers, they looked pretty good, but our comment was, too bad we don't get to keep that. We can only keep that 3-year rolling average. So that's, we're artificially hamstrung in that way, and I think that gets to, those are one of the big factors. We're able to exempt public safety, but that's at the detriment of the rest of the organization, health insurance costs, things like that, that I know that we're personally all trying to struggle, along with trying to stay market competitive and looking at that our market study that we had done.
And to tag on to that, I mean, that's where I was coming from with, if our citywide expenditures were only growing 1.6 or 2.9%, that'd be one thing, but that's not the case. And so that's where I was coming back to, of saying, I get that in a vacuum, if all we were talking about was a general wage adjustment, that I could understand using that CPI, but that's not the reality. And so we have to be able to balance our revenues to the expenditures. And in addition to a general wage adjustment, we have merit, we have competencies, we have incentive pay, we have all those other economic things that the grand total far exceeds 1.6% or 2.9%. So that's where I'm still contemplating all of this, because I see it as a big picture indicator, but I feel like the conversation we're having is talking about it in an isolated vacuum of just a general wage adjustment. I don't know if I'm articulating that very well, but.
A couple things I'm confused about.
Okay.
One, if the economy was in a downturn, wouldn't the number be reflected as a 0 or even a negative number on the CPI?
Yes.
And then the other part of that is that in the study, it says that we do not have enough money, that the merit system should be suspended, it says, because we just can't afford it. So that means, to me, the CPI is a less expensive way to go.
To me, that statement by the consultant in her explanation of it to me was that the CPI is or a CPI adjustment or a general wage adjustment or some sort of market adjustment to the plan as a whole is a priority above a merit pool. And we have taken her words to heart on that as an organization, and in our budget proposals, that our priorities will be to make movement of the structure and the incumbents within the structure before we fund a merit pool, which might be a conversation here as well, because there is merit step movement for people within this program, within the IAFF pay plan. So if we were to adopt something that was a structural movement as the first priority, some formula, whether that be CPI or something else that we discussed today. But if we make structural movement, which the consultant said is of primary importance in a compensation program, if that happens, what things would be things that could be suspended from a compensation standpoint, should there be financial strain on the city? There is a financial strain on the city in being able to provide all three of these things. Those are some pretty substantial numbers for 2020. I think her report mentioned something about $1 million and $1 million, from a gross estimate when she was writing this report last December. So if we're able to do one and not the other, she says that the adjustment to the structure the general wage adjustment type movement is the primary thing to do. Is that something that we should enter into this conversation? It's not one of these two numbers, but it's another one of the numbers in our in Article 8 that talks about the step movement, which is it has a merit component to it, to the step movement. But is that something that we could talk about suspending, should that be the case, and especially for the people who've hit market rate? Because part of what we've thought about in a proposal to you is how do we change the structure so that we get to the market rate that we want to be a little bit faster, because she had mentioned in her report to move to the market rate a little bit faster. So how do we get the people at the bottom up to that market rate when we know that the top is probably okay? And so step movement after a certain point isn't always necessary to be automatic from a compensation standpoint. I mean, I know we all like it because we all like it, but can that be put on the table for discussion?
And do you guys have a proposal for a play plan?
Yeah, let me pass that out, and then maybe that'll give us some context as to moving forward for formula. What we did is we put some proposed language together, and I think, does everybody on the city team have it? I think I passed it out during our caucus. Okay. Dean?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it okay to hit?
Yes, ma'am. What
we did is just basically took section 8.1, which is the structure of the plan, and then section on page 2 is section 8.2, which is the general wage adjustment, the structure movement, if you will, of the plan. And in our proposals here, let me walk you through them a little bit, because I kind of have to walk through it myself to understand what I put down. This is contract language. So for me, this is the words that go behind the chart that I find more helpful, which is starting on page 3, I can walk you through the chart, and then we can come back to the words maybe. I start with the chart first, and then I move back to the language when I get it to look like what I'm thinking about. So page 3 is simply our current pay plan. It's the 2019 pay plan, and I put it in here for illustrative purposes. And I just crimped these so you can rip them apart easy if you need to. I kind of have to. So this is our 2019 pay plan on page 3. On page 4 is 2 steps here. The first one, one of the things we wanted to accomplish for goals is we wanted to make our starting rate very market competitive. It's important that we attract talent, that we attract the top of the line talent to our department early on. We want our starting rate to be very competitive. And I realize that the extra board rate is not part of your MOU group, but it is of interest to all of us to have a very competitive starting rate. We have in practice for the past several years with the extra board group hired them at what we called in our pay plan this firefighter basic if you look at the 2019 pay plan, which is called FO1. Step 1 in 2019 is $14.46 an hour, or when you look at this, the top block is hourly, the bottom part is annual. $14.46 an hour, which is just a little over $42,000 a year. When people finished if they were hired, when they finished the recruit training, they were moved during that period of time. If they were an EMT, they had been trained for the AEMT, and once they achieved the AEMT, they were moved to, the FO2 rate of $15.54, which is an annual rate of $45,000, even while still on extra board. And if they were a paramedic already, they would be moved to that $16.84 in the FO3, an annual salary of $49,000. That's what we have been doing. And then, at some point, they are then offered a full-time position as we have openings. And they have frequently stayed at that same rate of pay, sometime depending on how long they've been there. They've been moved up a step. It's kind of varied over the years, but I believe, Chief, we are moving people over at the same rate of pay right now.
From the extra board?
When they move extra board to full-time,
Yes. When they come over from extra board and hired full-time, they come over at the same rate.
so they're basically coming over at that step one rate. On one of those two categories, either AEMT or paramedic, depending on their training. What we propose doing is pulling that up into its own little mini pay plan. I know, these numbers are really tiny. Huh? I always like to try and fit it on one page. So what we propose doing structurally is actually putting that practice. Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay. We propose putting that practice into a mini pay plan, if you will, which is up at the top, which again, I realize is not something that you guys are negotiating, but for us to have that structure in writing is kind of nice. So we propose putting that up in its own little piece. We propose, so that's one value. We also propose offering a salary increase to those when they go full-time. So we have grayed out, the first step on the pay plan because we don't really think we want to move people over laterally. We want to be able to give them a little increase. Again, you're not necessarily negotiating that, but that would become the base rate for your membership at that point. We also feel like increasing that from our current rate is important. So we have made those numbers in that little tiny extra board plan equivalent to what is now step 2 of the 2019 program. Does that follow? So step 2 of the 2019 program is 1593 and 1726, and so you'll see those two rates on our structure proposal. Does that make sense? Is everybody following?
Yes.
Okay, let me know if I start to lose you, because I talk about this a lot, so I go fast. So we have grayed out step 2 of the pay plan because we want to actually hire our extra board in at that higher rate of pay, making a very competitive starting rate of pay. But when they move full-time, we want to be able to move them up one more step. So we have made now the full-time FO2 firefighter AEMT starting at 1633, which is the current step 3 of the 2019 pay plan. And then 1769, which is again the current step 3 of the pay plan. We have also grayed out the positions that we no longer use, and I don't think there's a few of us at this table that remember when we merged the fire department with the DCAS, and at that time there was a commitment made to the employees who were here that there were a few people who did not receive medical training to become the AEMTs, or that wasn't the title at the time because that's a new title, but become the EMTs, and there were a few people who weren't required to become. Did anybody not become a firefighter?
Everybody had a firefighter.
Everybody became a firefighter, but not everybody had to advance in the medical piece. And so we had some extra pay grades, I guess is what I'm getting at. Everyone has retired. that fit those pay grades except for one.
Okay.
So what I did is that person is over here, if you go to F04, fire engineer, basic engineer, you'll see it grayed out all the way to the very last step. And then we left the number in there and we basically ungraded. The reason they're gray is because there are some formulas that are sitting underneath in the pay plan. But we left this person's pay. This person will, unless we expand the steps like we did last time, will always be at the top of the pay plan. They're a very tenured employee with us, and they have been able to move through the entire pay plan previously. So we left that rate there. So, but basically what it is, it's the same rate as it is currently, the $24.91 and $24.91. But we wanted to get rid of the positions we no longer use because frankly, they confused our consultant immensely. She's like, how did you have all these pay grades? And we were like, well, we really don't use them all anymore. So we're proposing to clean up the pay plan from that standpoint. And I think I've grayed out all the ones that we don't use anymore except for that one rate. So that's the structure changes that we're proposing. We feel like that addresses our hiring rate. It addresses the ability to give a promotional rate when people go full-time. It cleans up to the pay grades that we're actually using and the requirements we're actually keeping for our requiring our employees to have in there. And then we're proposing, we also, the second piece of that, by being able to start full-time at what is currently the step 3, we would propose making that step 1 if it's adopted, gets us to that market rate sooner. One of the things that the consultant addressed was that we were taking a little longer to get to the market rate than we needed to be. I don't think she necessarily had a lot of problems with the maximum of our pay plans, I mean, other than having to keep it up to date structurally, but she did feel like we needed to get to that market rate a little bit faster. And so by starting people at that step 3, that accomplishes that. So it's basically pushing it up there 1 year sooner. And when I have another old version of this when I was messing around with it, where I actually highlighted the steps that fit the market rate against where someone would be in that 3 to 5 year time span. And we were right on target for a 5-year person at the firefighter AEMT. I'm working this off memory, so if I misquote a little bit, forgive me. We were 1 step short at the 5-year mark for a paramedic, firefighter paramedic, and we were 1 step short at the lieutenant, I believe. And I don't think we had a good market match for the engineer, or it might be just the opposite on the firefighter and the engineer, I can't remember. But anyway, I marked those on a pay plan to see how far we were. So by dropping off those bottom 2 steps allows us to get there 1 year sooner, and so our 5-year people would definitely be at or above the market. Our 4-year people would be right there, and our 3-year people would be just right there, right there hovering around that market rate as well. So we felt like it hit that market rate at the point that she recommended. And one of the things that we could do that I didn't do on here that we have in our primary pay plan is we actually have a number, we've highlighted a number in the primary pay plan of that market rate so everybody knows what it is. We may want to maybe highlight that here, is that this is our market rate. Instead of just having steps marching to the top, that we actually identify our market rate in here. And I don't have that marked, but that would help us moving forward as well, because I do believe that that's an important value, is having our 3 to 5 year people at market as we do market studies going forward. So this structure change allowed for all of those things to happen that she made as recommendations. This pay plan was, as we may have mentioned a little bit earlier, isn't as far behind the market as our primary pay plan. And so movement in that structure forward and all the incumbents within it doesn't need to be quite as great in 2020 as what we feel like the primary pay plan needs to be. And so the bottom part here is our proposal of a 0.5 general wage adjustment to everyone within the structure. And it basically takes that top structure, which I put out here to mimic the 2019 plan so you can see the relationship, but I've increased it by 0.5% at the on that bottom table. And we would propose this bottom table as a 0.5% general wage adjustment. That 0.5%, you know, to go back to some of our conversation, is on a multitude of factors, where we think we need to be market competitive for next year. The data that Victoria was using, our consultant, you know, she did it all on the 2018 numbers, so there was some movement for the IAFF plan for 2019, and we feel like a little movement needs to happen in 2020, just as we've been talking about. And we feel like this is a good proposal. The other number that we all pay attention to, and I, again, realize you're not negotiating for this group, but as a city, we have to pay attention to it, is the number in the lower right-hand corner. And that is the topped out rate for our fire lieutenant paramedics, and how that compares to the market rate or the entry rate for our captain position, which is the next position up on the, you know, in the structure of our fire department. So it's very important that that rate, along with any, because these are all non-exempt positions that receive overtime, so that along with overtime, along with other things, incentives that are other sections of the compensation program, we have to watch that compression. So that is a number that is of immense interest to me as a compensation person in setting up pay plans. It's immense interest to the organization, because if the fire department can't promote staff, we end up with an executive staff that may not be the highest performers in the organization. You never know. I'm not saying that we're there, because I think people who want to be captains become captains for reasons other than their pay alone. And they are high performers, and they do want to be leaders in the department. So I don't think pay is the only component that motivates a person to move to that executive level, but you also want to pay attention to it closely. You don't want it to be a disincentive.
Lori, how do you and city staff feel about those positions? Are they where they need to be? Those positions you're talking about, or do you feel like they're behind or they're ahead?
Well, they're part of that primary pay plan, and I don't think the incumbents within it are a part of that, and I need to go look, but a part of that group of people that need to move up to the market rate, that 3 to 5 years to be at market rate. But I will tell you, the market rate for captain, even with a proposed adjustment for 2020, which, by the way, is not proposed or through the budget or even accepted by city management yet, but that even with that movement that our consultant talks about for 2020, this rate and the captain market rate are very close, exceedingly close. And that this doesn't illustrate other pay items that the paramedics in the lieutenant job classification can enjoy as well, or may enjoy.
When
you
you say
talking about-
close, do you mean close to being market competitive, so they're still below, or they're close to?
The current incumbents, the people who occupy the position right now, are not below the market rate, I don't believe.
So
I
they're
need to
at
check
40
one or two,
40
but
to
they're right at.
60%?
Hmm?
They're in that 40 to 60%?
No. No, I don't think so. I would need to confirm that, but I don't think any of them are. If there is, there's maybe one. Hmm?
They're above or below?
They're above. They're where they should be. Well, they are above the market rate. There may be one person, I'd need to verify that, and it would be someone fairly new in the position, but that market rate, they're not, you know, they're close in rates of pay. we kind of watch that when we promote people, but it's close.
You were saying they were close to this lieutenant rate.
Very, 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 very. So that is of interest to the city, and that's as we look at this structure, and it's of interest to the department as we look at this structure moving forward. So all of that is a balancing act, when we put this structure together, with you in looking at that. So that is, I guess, in a nutshell, what is in language, ensconced in language on the first 2 pages. And we can go through that language, but that's what it is, if you like. And part of this, and I think the one section that, I can't even remember what that section is, that we proposed to strike in 8.2.3, I'd have to look it up again. So as you can see, that .5 is in recognition of a number of market factors and a number of things, including that we know there's movement in the CPIU, but it is not a hard number with that.
And so you're using this .5, the GWA, essentially as a maintenance program, right?
Yes,
And do you feel that's gonna keep up? Or do you feel that
Yes.
that maintenance program is just something that you can afford, but it's still gonna fall behind?
I feel like it's gonna keep up. I feel like this pay plan, and even in the statements that Victoria made about this pay plan independently of the broader statements she made for the city, all 3 pay plans together, I feel like she felt this pay plan was market competitive at the time that she looked at it. And I think this 0.5% will keep us there for 2020.
What indicators did you use to get to that conclusion, that 0.5%? Did you look at comparable cities? You looking at, what things are you looking at?
Yeah, we rely a lot on our market cities for that data, so we did ask them where their movement is, and now they follow the same budget schedule that the rest of us do. So in talking with their HR people, it's the same statements I'm making, is that we think this is what we've submitted to the city. We don't know what'll go through, that sort of thing still, because none of the budgets are finalized.
Yeah.
And nothing is solid until it's done. But.
Are you using the comparable cities in the compensation plan, or comparable cities that we've used in the past, or a
Both.
mixture?
Both.
Or
We
what
call,
are those
we,
comparable cities
we
that we're
call
using?
them all. We know that our best market matches, and I would need to pull up the data, cause I have a hard time committing it to memory, but it's our same group of cities that we've been using for a number of years. We matched the ones, specifically that had the same, the exact same training. So we matched AEMT to AEMT. We didn't have good matches all the way through. I think there's one job classification that we only have one match, which doesn't really make a market. But we looked at that one match, and I think that's noted in Victoria's report as well. We did, and that's why the grayed out areas still have numbers behind them, because our best match is with firefighter basic, not the AEMT. So underneath that grayed out area is a number that we feel is market competitive with the group that we were able to get the most matches with.
And that's because you just couldn't find other departments that do the AEMT or are comparable?
There are fewer that require it in our market group, and I think we recognized that from last time, that our best matches come with that basic rate that we don't use anymore. But
And that group being the extra board versus?
no,
Okay, I misunderstood.
not having the AEM additional certification, so in other words, most of the departments use an EMT, and you guys know this terminology better than I do, but most of the departments are using that with a few that have an actual job classification or an incentive for the AEMT. That basic is much easier to match to. This structure does not change that differentiation between that basic and the AEMT from what we had in past years. So when we got our market data and had it matched to the basic, these formula increases are the same as they have been in the past. Now, we have had some conversation that there may not need to be that entire 6% differential between the basic and the AEMT, which is what's happening. And we may need to, and we have about a 16% differential between the basic and the paramedic. We may not need those same differentials, because I don't think our market that does pay for the AEMT has that same, I think our differential for AEMT is pretty high. So
That's
our,
because the markets are not doing that, right? Doing that job?
no, that's because those that offer an incentive for it are not as high as our differential.
But no of the departments are doing that. That's what you're telling me.
I wouldn't say zero.
No, I'm not saying zero. I'm saying, but they're comparable cities. Not many of their comparable cities are doing the AEMT?
Correct.
Okay.
And so most of them, that's why we keep the basic as
Mhm.
the baseline formula that we compare to from a market standpoint.
And what about the whole transport versus not transport issue?
Right.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that the cities that you looked at are only those who, like us, also do transport? Or are some of the cities that we looked at ones that aren't transporting folks?
Both.
Say probably most of them.
Mhm.
Not.
Mhm. So underneath this gray out area is our best match. And our differential is not changing between our best match and where we placed on our proposed structure, the AEMT, and where we placed the paramedic. I think we have a very lucrative differential between that basic and AEMT compared to others who offer a differential. Not everybody does, not everybody pays for that AEMT, but
Mhm.
those that do are not paying the same, as high as we are, I don't think, on the whole. So I think we do very well at that AEMT rate.
I wanted to ask about, when you mentioned that you're not necessarily getting the best applicants to move up to captain.
I don't want to say that.
Okay.
What I want to,
You mentioned that, or the clarification was, that I wanted was, because the lieutenant paramedic gets paid well, they're not willing to move up to captain, is that what you're meaning?
no, that's not what I mean either. What I mean is I don't want that salary to be so close to the captain that it becomes a disincentive for people to want to promote. I firmly believe that those who want to be leadership in the department do it anyway. I don't think money is a primary motivator from people who want to be department leaders. But you also don't want it to be a disincentive. You want it is important to pay attention to that. I'm not saying, and there are people in this organization who hold higher levels that make less money than who are fairly new in that higher level leadership position, who make less money than the people they supervise who have a number of years of experience and are very seasoned in their positions. That happens in a lot of pay plans. In fact, most pay plans, that dynamic can happen. But we need to know when it's happening, and we need to make sure that we have to pay attention to it. So it is very important to me to pay attention to that, and know that it's very close, and know that we don't want to flip-flop certain things. We don't want to, because the way you move through this pay plan is different than the way one moves through the primary pay plan. The primary pay plan is set up to get to market rate very quickly, 3 to 5 years. And then after that, the movement could be slow. It could be based on whether or not we can fund a merit pool or not. Now, the whole structure would move with that general wage adjustment and incumbents, but their position within that pay plan might hover around market and slightly above for a long time. Getting to the top is not the same objective as with a step plan. When you have a step plan, as we've discussed, that was a big piece of our conversation last time, you step your way to the top. And it is the plan. It is the plan to go to the top. And so therefore, instead of watching market rate to market rate between the two pay grades, we're watching top of the plan to market rate. Because the two pay plans structure the movement through them differently. And it's important for us to pay attention to that with the two pay plans that we have that are step plans against a market, against a plan that is not a step plan. That's important to pay attention to. And that's why I have the discussion of the primary pay plan, and even Victoria's comments were that should the city be in one of those economic downturns and is unable to fund compensation optimally in its most advantageous way, it's important to make that general wage adjustment, to keep those with 3 to 5 years of experience at market rate, and keep people at that market rate, and that the merit is the very last thing funded. I think the discussion here would be if we value those same things in this pay plan, there needs to be a provision for suspending the step movement through a pay plan should we have an economic downturn. I think that step movement is equivalent to the merit in the primary pay plan. And I think it's all part of one big discussion. They're not really independent of one another. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
In my career, I can recall 2 significant recessions. Do you know what happened during those years as far as wage increases or during these negotiations?
In my head, I'd have to look them up. What years were they?
Well, I believe the real estate issue after 9/11, that's what I associate with 9/11. It seems like it was close to that event, and then the other one was 2008, if I recall.
I'd have to look them up. Do you know? Do you remember?
No, I'm just wondering
Okay.
how those negotiations went.
I would have to go back and look at those MOUs. Because our general wage adjustments, no, it would all be archived in the MOUs in the form of probably a general wage adjustment.
2009 negotiation was.
I refill my coffee.
Lori, does that conclude the proposal from the
That's-
city?
That's our proposal
Okay.
for all of the items in 8.1 and 8.2.
Okay. Well, we're requesting a caucus.
Mhm.
Aaron, what do you think? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? I know we're short on time as it is.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, okay.
So maybe we'll try to keep it to 10, but for sure 15.
Okay,
And,
so 5, 10,
I
between
know we
quarter
still
after
have
and
to-
20 after?
because I know we still have to set agendas for next meeting and.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you very much. Okay, Kurt, I think we're back.
Great.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am. Well, obviously, there's a lot to review, and it'll take more, for us, more than the 10 or 15 minutes, but we appreciate the break. So before we move into agendas and whatnot, we just encourage the city to consider that issue of compression to be comparable to fire lieutenant advanced EMT rather than fire lieutenant paramedic, because that paramedic cert is additional, so the pay is additional.
okay.
So though it's not literally considered an incentive, it's not a requirement, it's something that the employee is doing above and beyond.
So you said Lieutenant AEMT
Yes, ma'am.
as comparable rather than the paramedic.
Well, for the issue of compression.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else today? We are getting close to the end. We could set our agendas
Set the agenda,
and,
yeah.
There were a few sections in 8.1 that we didn't talk about today. And we
Okay.
wouldn't finish with those
okay,
next day. I mean, I think they're pretty, some straightforward sections, actually, so
so discuss.
no more like dates and stuff, so.
Okay, so discuss remaining sections of 8.1.
Yeah.
And can we look forward to some proposed language on section 8.2 that kind of reflects your thoughts on the CPIU?
Yes, we can,
And then we can
We'll
start
try to-
working from there.
okay.
Okay. So shall we leave 8.1 and 8.2 as the agenda items under old business? Do you want to designate anything for new business? Should we complete those next time? My notes have,
There's multiple sections just marked economic item under 8 that don't mention striking. Are there still more proposals from the city coming under those items?
I think we had indicated that we wanted to talk about section, in my notes, for all of the sections in Article 8, 8.1 and 8.2 we're discussing, and that is our proposed language to start working from, so if we can
Okay.
exchange yours next time, that would be fantastic. We've talked about longevity, we eventually wanna come back to that, but if you wanna move to some of the other sections first, we can. We do wanna talk about 8.4 skill incentives. And I think there's some statements under some of the other sections, so I could list all of the sections under 8, under Article 8, and we could just move through those. And if you guys have any language that you propose, you could bring it or have it ready to go, and we could exchange those as we get to them. I don't know if you had any of those marked specifically, but we did have some that we had marked initially, back in April, that we could work through those. Would you like to do that?
So for new business, we would go through your proposals from 8.3 until how far? Just so
We
can
could do the
compare.
remainder of Article 8. I could even put down Article 9, because those are really the only two sections we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah,
Those are the ones that I identified some economic items and that we haven't gone through in the previous agendas, so I could list them all out so that they're there. Would that work for you?
Yes, ma'am?
yeah.
Okay, do you have any other sections that you wish to propose or discuss in particular, other than the ones that you had listed in April as well?
So we were under the impression that our proposals were due and locked in. So are you saying that we can make additional proposals?
I don't know. The city is not going to make additional proposals other than the ones we listed. I mean, we'll have specific contract language that, but the ones that we listed were a finite list. I guess I would entertain that discussion, but I would want to caucus with the other members of my group before I said, yeah, let's talk about other articles.
Well, I just didn't understand the
Yeah.
question, because we don't feel like the city has definitive proposals. Most of these just are requesting discussion, and then proposals are developed from that. So it's very difficult to know how many total proposals there will be in this time frame that's been set. We submitted our 6, as a measure of good faith for the 2 months we have to discuss things, and we're not prepared with more than that.
I would contend that you don't have contract language either for the CPIU. So that statement that we put the things out on the table that we wanted to discuss, our list was complete.
Okay.
I guess we
Okay.
thought your list was complete as well, of
Yes.
items that we wish to bring to the table to
Mhm.
discuss. If there's something that you want to discuss, I would entertain listening to that,
Mhm.
and that's what I'm asking. Is
Okay.
there anything else?
No,
If
ma'am,
I
we have
list
our
the
6
cities-
proposals, and you're right, we
Okay.
didn't present them as language, we presented them as interests.
Okay.
Um,
So, I'll go through that list from our April proposals, and any of the sections that either the IAFF or the city had made notes on at that time, I will list them under new business if we haven't discussed them before. And so that we can have at least gone through once everything that was on one or the other list in April, again. That sound good? And the city would be prepared to actually have contract language for any of the items that we had listed in April. And
okay,
if you could do the
Mhm.
same, then we could
Mhm.
have contract language for then we can start maybe coming to conclusion on some of the sections.
Okay.
Because some of them are gonna be easier than others, I think, going forward. But if the next meeting, we get all of that out on the table, then we know where to move from there. Does that sound reasonable?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we'll come prepared. I'll list them on there. I'll get the agenda out. If there's anything that I miss, let me know. And then the city will come prepared, as we hit each of those sections to actually have language for the contract. And I guess I would request the same, of the IFF for all of the sections, and then we can present those and then start moving back through, in whatever order we want to move back through in. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. And our next meeting is scheduled for June 4th, which is Tuesday?
I believe it's Tuesday afternoon.
Tuesday afternoon, 1:30 to 4, in this location. And I don't have anyone noted as being absent that day, so I think we'll all be here that day. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if Casey, if we made any notations in that working document today, but I did date one for today's meeting in that grid that I work off of. I'll send it back out. Did you make any notations today?
Not,
But I'll send it out with today's date on it, so that
you'll add our language that we can do.
I'll add the language we handed out, and I'll put it in blue, so you can see it. Does that sound reasonable?
Mhm.
Okay. I'll move everything else to black ink, that's been previously sent.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.